Breaking news out of Cottonwood Heights, where a suspicious missing persons case has turned into a homicide.
11:47 at night. A recorded line, and on it, a voice with no tremor, no grief, no hesitation. Only ice. On the other end, a man who thought he knew her is hearing the truth for the first time, and what she tells him next will end up dissected in a courtroom, breaking apart a marriage, a murder, and a body that, to this day, has never been found. 9 days earlier, Jennifer Gledhill reported her husband missing. By then, investigators say, the murder had already happened. The cleanup was over. The confession had already been made. Her husband was missing, she told them. Matthew hadn't come home. He'd said he'd be gone a week and told her not to call. It was a simple story. It should have ended there. It didn't. Because somewhere beneath the manicured lawns of Cottonwood Heights, Utah, behind the door of a $1 million home where a Green Beret and his wife were raising 3 children, something had already gone wrong. The garage still opened the same way it always had. The bedroom still smelled faintly of bleach, too faintly and too recently for anyone to believe it was nothing. Matthew Johnson was 51. On September 20th, he vanished from the middle of his own life, without a text, without a call, without a trace. His wife, Jennifer, 42, was the kind of woman neighbors called a homebody. Kind, unremarkable, in the way people are unremarkable, right up until they aren't. She waited 8 days to report him missing. By then, investigators would later learn, she already knew exactly where he was. She just wasn't telling anyone, not yet. To understand how a man like Matthew Johnson could disappear without a single struggle, you have to go back further, to a marriage that had been rotting quietly for months behind a very expensive front door. Jennifer and Matthew had been discussing divorce since July 2024. Court documents describe a relationship that had turned highly dysfunctional, corrosive in ways neither of them could walk back. In August, Jennifer filed for a protective order against her husband, claiming she feared him. But when 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus reviewed her own evidence, the videos she herself submitted, he found something else entirely. A woman who appeared unafraid, confrontational, and, by his reading of her text messages, one who seemed to be goading Matthew toward violence rather than fleeing it. On September 16th, 5 days before the murder, Minus dismissed the order. No abuse, he ruled. And then he wrote a line that reads now like a warning nobody heeded, that the conduct of both parties over the past several months reflected a marriage bringing out the worst in each of them, one that should have ended in divorce long before it reached this point. He had no idea. Divorce was never going to happen. In the weeks that followed, Matthew's behavior changed. He began sleeping at a National Guard facility, friends say, unwilling to spend nights under his own roof. He told his longtime friend, retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson, that he'd finally decided the marriage was over and it was time to move on. He never got the chance. What Matthew didn't know was that his wife had been living an entirely separate life. She was having an affair, an intense one, not a passing distraction, with a man who would later become the single most important witness against her. On September 19th, 2 days before the murder, Jennifer showed him something she probably shouldn't have. A loaded Glock 19X she kept inside her home. He thought nothing of it. Military families own guns. Prosecutors would later argue it wasn't a coincidence at all that same week, she arranged for her 3 children to stay at her parents' house on the one night that mattered most. September 20th began like any other day. It ended in a confrontation. Matthew had discovered the affair, and witnesses later described a bitter, prolonged argument between husband and wife that night. two people finally saying everything they had been holding back for months. He never got to say anything else. In the early hours of September 21st, while Matthew slept in their master bedroom, Jennifer took his own 9mm handgun and shot him in the head. According to her later confession, she then loaded his body into a rooftop storage container, slid it down the staircase, and packed it into the back of their minivan. She smashed his phone. She drove his truck to a nearby street and left it there, a manufactured trail leading nowhere. Then she drove north, and somewhere along that route, she buried her husband in a shallow grave whose location remains unknown to this day. She came home and started cleaning. Bleach on the walls, carpet cleaner soaked into the master bedroom floor, a brand new mattress ordered to replace the one that couldn't be saved. It would arrive within days, long before anyone thought to ask where the old one had gone. On September 22nd, just before midnight, Jennifer drove to her lover's house and told him everything: how she killed Matthew, how she disposed of him, how she cleaned the house behind her. He noticed bruises on her body and asked what happened. She told him, almost casually, that she'd gotten them burying her husband. He was terrified, and he decided, quietly, to start recording her. In the calls that followed, Jennifer said things that would later become some of the most damning evidence in the entire case. Asked if he was afraid, she told him, "Wow, if you think I could even hurt a fly." She described Matthew stripped of humanity. He's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. He wasn't Matt. Asked whether she'd be afraid if their roles were reversed, she said, "Not if I deserved it," before comparing herself to the Queen of Hearts, musing about rounding up the scum of this earth and putting them on an island, or simply killing them all. She asked him, almost gently, not to think of her as a monster. All of this, the confession, the bruises, the chilling detachment, happened before Matthew Johnson was ever officially reported missing. Jennifer was already speaking about her husband as though he no longer existed, while the rest of the world still believed he might walk back through the door. 6 days later, on September 28th, she finally called the police. Meanwhile, the Utah National Guard had already begun searching after Matthew failed to report for duty on September 23rd. His absence noticed by an institution built around discipline and routine, long before his own wife raised the alarm. Her lover, by then, had been quietly gathering evidence: screenshots, recordings, a paper trail she didn't know existed. On October 2nd, he brought it all to police. What they found when they executed a search warrant on the Johnson Gledhill home confirmed everything he'd told them. A large blood stain soaked into the carpet beneath the bed, blood on the frame slats, the unmistakable smell of bleach, reddish-brown spots on the walls, the frame, the blinds, and that mattress, brand new, ordered September 24th, delivered just 2 days later. GPS data pulled from Jennifer's phone placed her at 6 a.m. on September 21st, exactly where Matthew's abandoned truck would later be found. It traced her again the next day, heading north toward Davis County, the same direction she claimed, in her own words, to have driven her husband's body. On October 2nd, 2024, Jennifer Gledhill was arrested for murder and obstruction of justice. She waived her right to a preliminary hearing and pleaded not guilty to all charges. But the investigation didn't stop with her. On October 24th, her parents, Thomas Gledhill, 71, and Rosalie Gledhill, 67, were arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. Neighbors had seen them at Jennifer's house for over 5 hours, far longer than the less than an hour they'd initially claimed. Investigators discovered Rosalie had purchased the replacement mattress herself, and that both her parents' phones had been remotely reset, erasing any record of where they'd been during the cleanup. When police pressed Thomas about the master bedroom, his answers grew careful, evasive, the kind that raise more questions than they resolve. Inside the parents' home, detectives found something else, a Glock 19X gun box, wrapped inside a child's onesie, hidden in a plastic tote near where Jennifer had been sleeping. It matched precisely the gun she had shown her lover 4 days before the murder. Months turned into more months, and Matthew Johnson's body still hasn't surfaced. Search teams have combed Davis and Weber counties, pushing as far north as Box Elder County near the Idaho border. More than 70 searchers, police, volunteers, and Matthew's own brothers-in-arms have walked that ground looking for him, his fellow Green Beret and friend of 12 years growing more frustrated with each empty stretch of wetland. At one point, a vehicle storage container was found floating in nearby water. Inside it, blood. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Matthew. It was one more piece locking Jennifer into the story her own lover had already told police. But it still wasn't him. Investigators have since concentrated their search on the wetlands near Farmington Bay in Davis County, still hoping to bring him home. Jennifer Gledhill now faces 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. At her bail hearing, prosecutors warned that she remained dangerous, that she'd hinted to her lover she was capable of demonstrating both her desperation and her potential for further violence. The judge denied bail. She remains tonight inside the Salt Lake County Jail. Even Matthew's death has left something unresolved. He held a $500,000 life insurance policy through Prudential, with Jennifer named as the sole beneficiary. With her facing murder charges and his body still missing, Prudential has asked a court to decide who, if anyone, should receive that money now. Jennifer's trial, originally set for December 2025, has already been delayed twice, first to June 2026 and now to December 2026, with jury selection beginning December 7th and testimony expected to run from December 8th through the 11th, and again from the 14th through the 16th. 3 children are waiting on the other side of all of it, old enough now to understand a little more each year, too young to have ever asked for any of this. 1 parent, gone. 1 parent behind bars, awaiting a verdict that could take everything else away from them, too. Prosecutors say the motive was almost mundane in its cruelty. An affair discovered, a divorce that would have meant sharing custody and finances, and a woman who chose a bullet over a courtroom. Somewhere north of Salt Lake City, in wetlands that stretch for miles in every direction, Matthew Johnson is still waiting to be found. The trial will come, a verdict will come. But until someone locates that unmarked patch of ground, this case will remain exactly what it has been since the night that recording started. A confession without a body, and a family that will never be whole again. Somewhere beneath those wetlands, Matthew Johnson is still waiting to be found. Until that day comes, this story isn't over.